What's up, guys? We are here with a banger video for our very first build of 2022. We put together this monster gaming machine. This is maybe the most powerful gaming system that you can build right now if you could actually get your hands on all of the parts. What's in it? What can it do? And why would you want to build it? We're going to talk about all that right now. So if you guys are new here to the channel, thank you so much for stopping by and checking it out. My name is Brian. Make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss out on any more of our builds, how-tos, and hardware reviews coming up every single week here. Also consider following me on Twitter at BPS_customs. So let's talk about this box here to my left, what it took to put it together, and how it performs in game. Of course, we're basing our system on the Intel i9-12900K. 8 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores. You guys know it by now. It's certainly power hungry. It still generates a lot of heat, but I think we can manage it with the setup we have here in our Lian Li PC-O11 Mini. Now, I did a build in this case a few months ago. It was an all AMD system. It came out really cool, but ever since then, I've really wanted to put together a super powerful machine in here using full-size components and kind of trying to figure out a way to make it all work. Now, we did have to do a few things in order to get a 360mm radiator into this case. We're using MSI's S360 Core Liquid, and it has this awesome screen over the pump top that you can use to display frequency of your CPU or temperature or GPU utilization or a whole host of other things. The issue with a 360mm radiator and using a full-size motherboard in this specific case is that the height is very short. And in order to get everything to work together, the radiator cannot be mounted as far back towards the motherboard tray as the case wants you to mount it. There's just no clearance there, and the radiator and fans would run into the VRM cooling solution and the memory sticks of the motherboard. How do you fix this? What I did was I 3D printed up some offset brackets. Now, these offset brackets actually just slide over where the radiator mounts. So the offset brackets mount to the case, and then the radiator mounts to the offset brackets, and you can move everything over by about an inch. Now, that means that this radiator and fans are actually over towards the glass, and it gives us a lot more room to navigate back here, and everything then fits really well. Although it's really tight, there's clearance there, and I'm not worried about anything hitting anything else. I was able to find these brackets on Thingiverse, and I'll link down below if you have a PC-O11 Mini and you're running into the same issues. Give this a try. Now, as far as all the other components in here, we're going with 64 gigs of memory, and we're going with DDR5. Now, DDR5 not exactly available just yet. It's starting to trickle out into the market, but still prices are relatively high. I went with a 4x16 gig kit of XPG DDR5 5200 speed memory. If you guys are building an Alder Lake system and you have DDR4 and you're really hesitant to spend $500 on a kit of DDR5, which I don't blame you for, there are plenty of motherboards that you could use that still utilize DDR4 and will honestly perform almost exactly the same. So don't be afraid to go that route if your budget dictates it. What we chose to do here, DDR5 in the ASUS ROG Z690 Formula motherboard. I know there's going to be a lot of people out there who yell at me for not using this board to its full potential because it does have a built-in water block over the VRM for VRM cooling, and of course, we're not doing a full custom loop in this system just yet. However, the board does have a lot of other features that I love, including an all-white aesthetic and a lot of connectivity on the rear I/O. Now, our storage configuration is leaning more towards me being able to use this as a daily driver, including editing on it. So that means we need a couple of drives. Our first drive is a Kingston Fury 2TB Gen 4 SSD. This thing is blazing fast and is the latest from Kingston. The other drive we're using is a Samsung 960 EVO. This is only a 256 gig drive. Now, why do we need this? This is going to be used as a scratch disk. When you work in Adobe Premiere, Premiere needs some place to put temporary files that it works off of while you're working in a project. And if you have that on the same drive as the program is running on, it slows things down. A scratch disk is a separate drive that you use just for the storage of those temporary files. And as such, it doesn't need to be huge. So 256 gigs should be plenty. I also tossed in another 2TB M.2 drive from XPG that's going to be used for mass storage. I'm going to use this temporarily to see how my YouTube workflow goes with only keeping the final exports and not all the associated files. So fingers crossed that works out. Now, what else is in the Lian Li O11 Mini? Well, we've got 9 fans from Be Quiet. The fans that come with the S360 are actually supposed to be really good and very silent. However, I wanted all the fans in the system to match, and the Lightwings fans from Be Quiet just came out, and they are awesome. Basically, you're taking Be Quiet's legendary build quality, over engineering, and silence, and you're slapping on some really cool RGB rings on both the front and the back of the fans. So you have a nice build aesthetic and still completely silent. My head's right here, I can't even hear it. It is pretty amazing. These fans are great. They also use an RGB controller hub that comes in every 3-pack. One thing I will say is you cannot daisy chain the RGB control hubs. There's just not enough power going through them in order to power all the LEDs. I tried this and it turned out terribly with flickering lights and the colors were all wrong. So if you're doing this, every hub can power 6 fans, but needs to be plugged in separately to the motherboard. Powering everything in here is the V850 SFX from Cooler Master. Now, how do you fit full-size graphics cards and 9 fans and a full-size ATX motherboard in a case that's this small? Well, you got to shrink something else, and that something else is the power supply chamber. So you have to use an SFX power supply here, and you are then limited to, I guess, about 850 watts. For our purposes, that's still plenty. I'm still well under that threshold. I'm not worried about it at all. However, I guess if you're looking to be future-proof and you want 1,000+ watts in your SFX power supply, that might be a little ways away. And then let's talk about this graphics card, the XFX RX 6900 XT Limited Black Edition. This is the XTXH version, meaning that it's made to overclock higher. You could put more power through it. They removed the artificial cap on frequency. We're not going to be going crazy with overclocking with this one this time, but I did really want to try out an AMD graphics card in a system like this that I want to try to use for video editing, because I've always been curious about how the high-end AMD cards would perform in Adobe Premiere. Even though it's supposed to be skewed towards NVIDIA and CUDA acceleration, there's so much potential here that I wanted to try it out. And also, this is an absolute monster when you're talking about 4K gaming. Yes, ray tracing still makes it stumble a little bit, but for the most part, when it comes to straight rasterization performance, this is on par with, if not better than, what NVIDIA is offering at the same price tier. So I'm definitely anxious to check this thing out. Let's talk about some results. I wanted to compare the system against something that's fairly comparable. So what I did was I ran a bunch of tests and compared it to my current editing system, which is an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X and an RTX 3080 Ti. So we're talking about top of the stack AMD CPU, top of the stack NVIDIA graphics card, 3080 Ti is about the same. And we're talking about here, top of the stack Intel CPU and top of the stack AMD graphics card. So gonna be an interesting comparison. All of these games run at 4K and completely maxed out settings, including ray tracing features if available. No DLSS, no Fidelity FX Super Resolution. So we're talking about native 4K performance on these systems. Let's see how they do. First up is Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. I tried to run the same path on the first level of the campaign, and the 5950X based system was about 5 to 7 frames per second faster on average as we look at this footage. Both systems give an absolutely outstanding experience in-game without any hitching or stuttering, and I would definitely recommend either configuration for this. Now let's talk about Cyberpunk. Still probably the hardest game to run right now, and you could really see that in this footage. Both games struggled to put up even anything that I would consider remotely playable under the max settings, max ray tracing configuration. The 5950X system was on average 7 to 8 frames per second faster, but I don't think either is playable. What I wanted to try to do is then turn off ray tracing and see how both systems perform. And in that case, we actually got extremely comparable frame rates. The 5950X system was probably 1 or 2 frames per second faster, but both systems were running about 40 to 42 frames per second in this scene that I was running through, and a much better experience, and the game still looked great. Far Cry 6 was up next, where the 12900K system was actually 9 frames per second faster than the 5950X system. Now, maybe this can be chalked up to the fact that Far Cry 6 was an AMD partnered title, so it's supposed to perform better on AMD graphics cards. However, this is still, with all the ray tracing features enabled, the game still looked amazing, and I'm just pretty happy that, for once we got a victory for our new build. The good times continued in Red Dead Redemption 2, where our 12900K 6900 XT system boasted a 2 frames per second victory over our 5950X 3080 Ti system. This game was run again at 4K maxed out settings with the Vulkan API. However, we did hit a little bit of a problem in our last game, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm not entirely sure what happened here, but the 12900K system was an absolute train wreck. It was an unplayable experience. The game looked awful, and I don't really understand why there was such a deficit here, but the overall result was that the 5950X system actually beat our new build by 61 frames per second on average. Yikes. But that is not all there is to a system like this, because as I said, I might want to use this for video editing. So how does it do in Adobe Premiere? Well, what I did first was I pulled up my last CES video. You can see that it has some adjustment layers and voiceover and a couple of different elements to it, and I did some timeline scrubbing in both. I actually think the 12900K system does this a little bit smoother than the 5950X system, although it is pretty close. Then I went to exporting, and I thought that the 3080 Ti was going to be hugely leveraged by Adobe and produce a much better result, and I was wrong. There was only a 4-second difference in exporting. The 12900K system did this video export in 3 minutes and 26 seconds, whereas the 5950X system did the same export in 3 minutes and 22 seconds, which is basically a negligible difference. So what do you guys think of our very first build for 2022? This thing is beastly. It does have a few problems, which I am gonna try to work on. I'm not entirely sure what exactly happened in Guardians of the Galaxy. Pretty disappointing. And also, I'd like to see if we could tweak the performance in Cyberpunk. Maybe adjust a few settings, maybe turn down some ray tracing features here or there. Who knows? I'll try to work on it for the future. But I think this build is something that I'm going to use on a daily basis moving forward to see how this kind of a system works from my workflow. What do you guys think? Is this the end game gaming PC build for 2022, or is NVIDIA and AMD processors still king of the hill? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, remember, get subscribed to the channel, hit that like button, do all the other YouTube type things, and I'll see you next time.